Thank you again so much for doing this.
Of course.
So just to start off, do some introductions. If you want to just talk a little bit about who you are, what you teach, what you research, just generally for background information for people.
I am Dr. William Miller. I am part of the School of Health Sciences. I teach the exercise science aspect of that. This is my third year at UE. I'm in that department. And so I'm really excited to be at UE, just being a smaller school environment, more one-on-one time with the students. I came from a doctorate at Ole Miss.
Okay.
Which was several thousand.
Much bigger, yeah.
Yeah, the undergrad population just for the degree was around 900, and then here you have 1,200 undergrads in total.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very big program compared to here, but this is why I like it, to get the one-on-one time with the students.
Absolutely, yeah, very good. And then a little bit about me. Obviously, I study archaeology and classics, which is completely different. This is my first semester writing for the Crescent, like I've said, and so the purpose, the way this project came about was we had people reach out to us and say, we'd really love to see student media cover more, faculty research. And we thought, yeah, that's a great idea because there's so many, because it's a small school, so many great faculty doing things and involving students and doing all these different projects. And so we kind of went from there, and Tommy and I kind of headed it. We just reached out to the deans, had them send in recommendations, had people express interest. And so it's been a month now or so of planning and lots of emails, and so we're really glad that this is the first, it's actually happening. Mm-hmm. So we're super, super excited about it, and I'm hoping that it can be kind of a ongoing series, going forward. We have more people lined up to do next semester, which is super exciting.
Yeah, and I'll spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good that you spoke to our dean, Dr. Lampkins, because I had just recently spoke to him about this project and the involvement of students, and then it was just a few days later I got the email.
Yeah, it's the timing.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Perfect timing.
Yes, very good. Yeah, no, we're super, super, super excited. So to dive into your research and stuff like that, so you've talked to me about how the title you gave me is Building Bridges, a community-university partnership for a home-based resistance-band exercise study in pre-diabetics from underserved communities. So can you just give a little bit of an overview, what your project is, what its objectives are, just some background?
Mm-hmm. So I want to start out first. This is the first type of project of this nature that I'm being a part of, just in general. I'm traditionally trained in neuromuscular research in my doctorate. So, and that's, one-on-one, bring somebody into a lab and you have a visit or two or three, and then you collect your data and then you write up on it. So why I was so interested in this particular project was bringing in the community aspect of it.
Okay, yeah.
And the project itself, the focus is to try to provide access to individuals that are from underserved, typically lower socioeconomic status populations, and give them the ability to be active, to exercise. And the goal, hopefully, with all of that is to train them for 3 months, provide them with some resistance bands. They train a few times a week with overseeing, the students are going to be overseeing the project along with us faculty that are going to be involved on this. And the hope is to hopefully change their blood sugar and get their body more active, change their body composition, so that would mean lowering the percentage of their body fat, hopefully, maybe increasing some muscle mass. And all of this stemmed from the importance of exercise, the muscle. People view it as an endocrine organ, and what that means, being able to control your blood sugar. And the better you can control your blood sugar with muscle and exercise, the less likely you're going to have diabetic-related problems throughout your life, and then diabetes lead to heart disease and a host of other comorbidities and problems that people can have.
So these are people who are at risk for diabetes, not people who necessarily already have.
Correct. Yes, these are people who are considered pre-diabetic, and the physicians that are part of the team, which I know we'll discuss in a little bit, there's criteria to diagnose them, and they take blood, and it gives you kind of a 3-month history of what somebody's blood sugar is like. And that protein marker in the blood can, if it alludes to a higher level of blood sugar, then we would consider them pre-diabetic, and then after that, the goal would be to, prevent them from actually being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay, and so you mentioned that this is like the first kind of this type of research for you with like the larger community involvement and stuff like that. Have you done stuff with diabetes in the past, or is that also kind of a new aspect
That's
for
also
you?
brand new.
Okay.
And part of it is because the starting up, as an early career researcher, starting up with my previous research that I did in my doctorate, trying to begin that at a new university is difficult honestly because of the equipment and the cost associated with it.
Like specific to what you were doing?
Yes, specific to what I was doing. So I toyed around with looking at different research opportunities, and then this one kind of fell into my lap because of my background in exercise physiology and training and exercise. And that's ultimately what led to this particular project. So working with an at-risk population technically, and trying to teach them. Honestly, the goal is to teach them about being active and how important exercise is.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense.
But this is definitely the first time I've worked with this population too.
So then what, what helped with, so it's first time with this population, so then kind of how's that impacted you, with the significance for you, or with working with these underserved communities? How is that something that's also new, or how did that become part of the project?
That is something new as well. So since I'm in the School of Health Sciences, I have students who are pre-professional, going to physical therapy, students that are physician assistant. That's the focus down the road. And I was put in touch with somebody, a doctor in town at ECHO, Dr. David Littman, and he works at ECHO, and ECHO is specific clinic for people who are underserved or lower socioeconomic status. So that's their primary population and their client and their patients that they see there. And I was also put in touch with Dr. Pearl Cordy Kumaple. She's at Deaconess. Okay. And she also sees a very similar patient population. So bringing that together, that's the start. That's the community tie to it. And I just figured if something related to my expertise in exercise, and I can be that part of the project, and then bring in the medical side from these individuals who know a lot more about pre-diabetes and diabetes in general, we tie all that together, and that was the primary focus of this grant that we got funded for. And the funding, a large part of it is to try to develop these partnerships between the university and the community. And there are some, but not in the one that we're developing now, so we're all brand new to it as well. So that's what's exciting about it.
That is exciting. Yeah, that's super cool. So then you'd mentioned these different doctors and these different organizations. Who, if it is something that happened this way, who kind of started it? Did you reach out to them? Did they reach out to you? Where did it kind of originate from?
So somebody, a physician assistant professor here at UE put me in touch with Dr. Littman. And we had a completely different idea to start, and we don't even have to go down that rabbit hole. And we had started having a conversation, and he brought in Dr. Corty Kumaple, and then we started shifting to let's try to just figure out if we can start more simply, involve these individuals, bring in somebody from USI as well, and to be able to use their facilities. So we brought in Dr. Cody Strom as well from there, and build this team to develop this project, provide some exercise, some education to these individuals, in hopes, after that they would train themselves, possibly when the study is done. But that's how it originated, was these conversations, just going back and forth and reaching out to people, and basically just meeting via Zoom and just talking, and it started to just completely sway our thoughts and our ideas on it, and that's ultimately what led to this particular project. We took a step back. We were going very big, which is good to be ambitious, but we were going very big to start, and so we took many steps back, and this is where we landed with this particular project.
Okay, so you say it seems like it evolved like pretty naturally, just like as you were having these conversations. You didn't like start from the beginning, set out to say this is what we're doing. You kind of just evolved.
Yes, exactly. We had the general idea of who we wanted to work with in terms of the patient population or the participants, and the general idea of providing exercise to them. And then the funding opportunity that came to us, that's where it also started having us shift toward a different project idea, because the funding opportunities focus is a community health partnership, so community and a university, and also involving individuals with, from underserved communities or lower socioeconomic status or at-risk people.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So then you all have been communicating, you've all been collaborating about this. So then kind of going forward from here, like you mentioned, like there's ECHO, there's Deaconess, these different organizations, like what sort of roles, like how are the roles or how is the different tasks like divided, I guess, between those different groups?
So the way, this is perfect because the way the grant is set up, and it's called the CTSI CHEP Trailblazer. So what that means is it came from the Center for Translational Research, that's the CTSI, and then the CHEP is the Community Health Education Partnership. Big long word, big acronym. So that funding's primary focus is to provide money to create the partnerships.
Okay.
And we're going to have to edit this out. What was your question again?
You're good. The question was just like, what is the role of these different people in the partnership now?
Sorry.
So, yeah, no, you're totally good.
So the role between each of us with the community, that's with ECHO and Deaconess.
Okay.
One of them has to be kind of the community lead, and that's Dr. Pearl Corti-Kumaple at Deaconess. She's going to be the person who pioneers the community side, so that's recruitment of individuals, and the patients, providing kind of the initial physical exam to these patients, and setting them up with the scheduling to come to another location whenever the time comes, whenever they're recruited, to do the rest of our assessments that we plan on doing kind of to start out. So that's her role. Dr. David Littman at ECHO, his primary role is a recruitment basis, pulling some of his patients and clients and doing very similar stuff as Dr. Corti Kumaple. Dr. Cody Strom at USI, we're going to be using some of his facilities. So in his human performance laboratory there, they have the equipment for the body composition assessments that we want to perform, and that's where we'll also do a lot of the other initial assessments that we can get into as we go through this.
Yeah. Okay, wow, that's really cool because it's like every single part is like different. Like one person is like coordinating, one person's recruiting, one person has the facilities. So that's super awesome. I know, like as a student, like my professors are always talking about like networking. Like if you go to a conference, if you do this, like make sure you're talking to people. And I think that just like illustrates that so well, like that idea of like taking advantage of all of the different things that people are like already have available to them in the community, because no one of those groups has all of those things.
Yes, that's exactly why this is why I was kind of jumped on board with this, bridging all those partnerships, and it's only going to just benefit everybody.
Of course,
bringing in funding, which is always a big factor of universities, bringing in funding to the community, educating that community. Yeah. And that's kind of going to be my primary role. I'm going to be providing a lot of the student help. Okay. And overseeing a lot of the exercise, and I'm the main primary writer for a lot of this. So the majority of the grant with assistance, but that was the lead on that, and then for anything else after that, when we start developing publications, and possibly, I'll take the lead on that with Dr. Cody Strom probably at USI, because he'll want to involve students as well. So that just, two different schools, one's public, one's private, but that's also building a partnership, because ultimately it's education, and you want to be able to involve the students as much as it can.
Yeah, and like if education is going to be like the best that it can be, that it can't happen in a vacuum. Like it has to be collaborative with all the different experts.
Yes,
so,
and that's
awesome.
Ultimately the best way you're going to learn too is jumping in.
Mm-hmm.
Getting involved, even if it's scary. This is daunting to me. It's already been quite a bit of work, but
for sure, yeah.
That's just the nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be very fulfilling in the end, and it will continue to be. That's the hope as time goes on, as it becomes more established and more students in the years to come want to be involved too. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kind of like on that same topic of like the networking. Like, so I know for this project you talked about how like you knew someone else who like put you in contact with people. Would you say like that's pretty common in your field? Like how like when people talk about like networking in your field, like what does that look like practically for like maybe for students who are like wondering what to actually do about that?
Yes, that's actually great you say that. As I meet with a lot of my students as an advisor role as well, we discuss that, and even with prospective students, it does become a who you know. It helps a lot. But the only way you will get to that point is actually being proactive and stepping out of your comfort zone and talking with people and being involved with stuff. That's how I was able to get from my undergraduate to my master's to my PhD to UE. And then at UE, being able to keep in touch with my older advisors from previous institutions, discussing stuff with my chair, discussing stuff, that's Jeff Tilley, discussing stuff with the dean, Dr. Lampkins, and just asking questions. Then I come to find out they have connections here, they have connections there. If you need extra funding opportunities, here's where you could possibly look here. A lot of stuff being a newer early career researcher faculty at UE, it's huge. And I've learned that you have to come out of your comfort zone, especially for somebody like me and myself who's a little bit more of an introvert when it comes to a lot of these things.
Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful. That's super good advice because, especially like as an early researcher, like that's kind of similar. Like a lot of the outlooks that students have, like being at the very beginning of like their like professional life, trying to figure out like what is the way to get those opportunities. And I know like in my personal experience, like with myself and some of my classmates, like some of us who have gone to do like archaeological work in the summer or have gone to like get jobs and different things like in areas that undergraduates don't usually have, like in leadership positions, it's always been a combination of like, yes, that person has the skill set, but more importantly, they like weren't afraid to be like putting themselves out there a bit. Like they might have been set up for rejection, but they sent the email, they did the interview, whatever it was, and then they end up getting these opportunities because of who they know, because of their professors. But it's always like the students' drive to get that opportunity in the first place.
Correct.
So,
you put in what you're going to get out. The more you put in, it's very likely you'll get a lot out of that. Or you can stand back. Research isn't for everybody. That's another reason it made me think of why I got involved in this, is because I previously was just always in a laboratory-based setting with people and equipment, and it's nice to be outside of that, and this whole study is going to be outside of the laboratory-based scenario, and that's part of the other thing that excites me about this.
Very good. Yeah, and I think doing anything that's like new in that way, that is like new and different, obviously can be, again, especially from a student perspective, can be really nerve-wracking. But that is like how you expand your experience and like expand like your professional like network, I guess, just by like being able to do those different things.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's I think that's a really good example of that. So kind of to turn to like how you set up the project, because we talked a little bit about like the goals and like some of the partners and stuff like that. So when it comes to like actually implementing it, which seems like is like the next step now that you have this grant and stuff like that, what is that gonna look like? Like how are you gonna get these participants? I know that you mentioned like one of the doctors is like kind of in charge of recruiting with ECHO, but how is that gonna work?
Let's try to keep this as kind of simple, and it's elaborate. So to me, I'm learning and reading more and more that this type of research, even though our goal is to get roughly 50 people completed through the 3 months of training 3 times a week, and doing an intervention or the assessments in the beginning and assessments at the end. trying to, the logistics around this, there are so much more that I ever thought because you're involving the community.
Okay.
So big factors are, if we're going to be doing a lot of our initial assessments of the composition, and something I forgot to mention earlier, looking at their self-efficacy, we're going to have a survey.
Okay.
And that's, how they feel about their physical,
Okay,
mental, emotional well-being, and if that changes. But being, getting those people there, that's a difficulty already.
Yeah, like the logistics.
So we wrote into the grant, providing individuals from these clinics who don't have transportation capabilities.
Okay, yeah.
They are going to be provided with an Uber gift card. If they have somebody that's able to drive them, or they have their own vehicle they're able to transport, they're going to get a gas gift card. They get one in the beginning to allow them to travel to USI from the clinic or wherever they need to go to do the assessments. And then at home, everything's Zoom based, so they can just hang out at home and do that. And the same would be for the end of the study. They'll get another gas gift card. And that's one of the things, it's an incentive, because it will be more money than the gas they need, but that's what's perfect about having the individuals at the clinics, because they know and they see these patients every day.
Yeah.
So they know exactly the hurdles we're going to run into. So they say, let's provide them with some gas. Let's provide them with a means of transportation. Let's provide them with the resistance bands that they're going to train with that they get to then keep. Let's provide them with another thing, a data gift card for to be able to use their phone for these Zoom workouts.
Okay.
And that's the whole logistics. That's just some of it, planning behind it, getting all these people involved. And then right now we're in the planning stages. In the spring is the hope to start doing some piloting and basically kind of do a test run as if we were a mock patient ourselves. Get an idea of time and what it's going to take for travel, what it's going to take for the initial assessments, how long it'll take to fill out the paperwork. I mean, everything you could possibly think of, that's what we try to plan for, and along with roadblocks you might encounter.
Okay, yeah.
So, and then the other logistics is getting the students involved in this, because they are going to be pivotal in providing the training that's going to happen 3 times a week for those 3 months. They will be trained and they will oversee the exercise sessions. And with the goal of having 7 to 8 individuals at one given time in a group-based Zoom session, that's still going to be multiple hours a week possibly that they will be needed. So that's part of the planning. That's all we think. Everything's perfect when you write it out on paper until you start performing it, and then you'll figure stuff out. But that's also how you learn.
Yeah.
It's another reason why Dr. Cody Strom is on this, because in his past he did research like this with pregnant women.
Okay.
And community-based, you have your own whole host with that at-risk population of things in roadblocks you might run into, but he's ran into those. So he has insight into things we might encounter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the big key probably there is just like flexibility, just to being able to see what needs to be done and then doing it, because like you said, you can't possibly anticipate all of the different issues that you're going to come up with, especially when you're working with these underprivileged types of communities. Does the whole factor of using the Zoom and then using resistance bands, which are obviously easy to learn how to use and stuff like that, easy to give people, does that kind of factor into it, trying to mitigate some of those potential difficulties?
Yes. And we are going to provide them with educational handouts as well, pictures of exercises that they might be performing. They get a familiarization session with the bands. They'll be provided with a video in case they forget in terms of how to set stuff up. Because the bands themselves are going to be ones that you can kind of anchor to a door. To be able to do, it increases the number of types of exercises you can perform. And ultimately, we're not expecting huge, massive changes, because in the realm of exercise, you need a lot of external influence and stimulus to really help the muscle grow. But bands, it's still going to provide these people with activity who might previously be sedentary or might have health risks, And there's a reason why exercise is medicine, that term was coined, and it's all part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like as someone like I've used resistance bands before, and it's like you can, yeah, it's easy to pick up. Having those like pictures is a great way of like having a different way of communicating those like instructions and stuff like that, to just try to be as inclusive as like all reaching as you can with like those instructions. So.
And I think that's important. I should mention as well in terms of inclusivity to this project. We basically are focusing on a population that's pre-diabetic, but outside of that, it's an age range of 18 to 65.
Okay, yeah, so that's quite the range.
Any gender they identify as. And as long as they don't have like an orthopedic injury, they fit the criteria for pre-diabetes, and they have a phone, then they can be part of this project. So there are unfortunate circumstances, there's only so much we can do to involve somebody in the project, and that's hopeful for the future, that we can discuss a little bit later in terms of how we're going to involve even more people, be even more inclusive for research in the future.
But having that as a goal at the beginning, I think is great, because like again, when you're trying to serve these groups that have been kind of like marginalized, you don't want to like further marginalize them as part of this process. So like trying to get them as much as possible. It
already happens in research a lot, unfortunately, whether it's purposeful or not. For example, females are notoriously under-researched, and that's with anything, especially related to exercise.
Okay.
So just continuing to do it, and that was instilled into me by my advisor with exercise. So years of already thinking about that and trying to be as inclusive as possible to answer your research question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the I think that's good. Like having the inclusivity, and then also having that just like that desire like going into it, because like you said, like sometimes it happens like unintentionally, but if you're just like trying from the beginning to like think about it, I think obviously that is better than if you weren't doing it. So yeah, absolutely. Anything else that you wanted to add about like the logistics, the setup and stuff before we talk more about the grants?
No, that was it.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so then I really wanted to talk about like the grants. I know we already talked about a little bit like how it's like this whole point of like forming this community network and stuff like that. But just because grant writing is another one of those things that like in class people will talk about, like we always have to get funding for your research, and then like the follow-up question is always like, how do I do that, like what do I do? And it's like there's just no instructions, like there's no like guidebook, there's no class on like how to write a grant. So I think it'd be really good for people like who are gonna like listen to this or watch this or read like the article, just to like hear a little bit about like what was that process like, especially since it seems like you did a lot of the writing.
So I was very fortunate all the way back to my master's program at the Southeast Missouri State University that I got involved a little bit with grant writing.
Okay.
Smaller style grants, they were more internal, so specific to the university itself and providing money. They're less rigorous, but that's kind of like my introduction, and it forces you to think about a lot more about a project than you would ever think, because a lot of times you're writing this even for people that are going to review the grants, you're writing it for somebody who may have no idea about what your particular project is, or they may not know a lot about exercise, but they still can review the grant if it's written well. Now that gets more specific. The bigger grants you get, you need an expert panel, and you're talking multi-million-dollar grants. That's where you're going to have experts. But so that's for my first introduction, and then I did write a lot of smaller grants in my doctorate.
Okay.
Only successful with one of them. So that is one thing I could say right out of the gate is expect to fail and expect to get huge amounts of red marks is kind of the way I think about it. That's what's nice is most grant writing operations, they have people who review them and they will provide you with feedback whether you make it or you're unsuccessful. And usually that's very helpful for the future. So definitely expect to fail. Now I say that with a grain of salt because this one time I've written for this trailblazer with this team, we were successful in the very first try.
Yeah, which is awesome.
So I'm batting 100%, but that's not always going to be the case. And it goes to the work ethic behind everybody putting in this, and then I think what really, based on the review feedback we got from the reviewers through the CTSI, is the focus on the population and the development of a new partnership.
Right, okay.
Because previously this organization, it's primarily like Notre Dame, Purdue, and IU. Those are the primary universities that were always involved. And then UE is now joining that team that you wouldn't expect sometimes because it's a smaller private
and
school.
those are some big name, massive funded, huge student population universities.
Yes.
So yeah.
So expecting to fail. Other aspects are you will spend a lot of time writing these and taking it in bite-sized chunks, doing your research. Most organizations, from my experience now, provide some type of, I don't want to say template, but like a feedback or how-to list.
Okay.
And they tell you, like, make sure you're focusing on this for this section, making sure you're focusing on this for this section. A lot of times now they have templates, and there's a reason for the templates is so that everybody has the same prompts when you go to apply for these, and then it's just the inner workings, so you're kind of even level.
Right.
When you don't want to have completely different templates for having 100 different people apply, because there's no standardized way to assess those grants.
Yeah, of course.
And that's another factor of it. The one big thing in terms of training that it's almost impossible to train you for somebody who goes through a doctorate, especially for grant writing, is the budget part of it.
Okay.
So that is still a foreign concept to me, and that's what's nice about previous experience and contacting people. You may not, if you just don't know, contact them. So for example, at UE, I talked with Sylvia and Rhonda. They're the grants and awards individuals here, and they help with a lot of the grants. And because UE is smaller, they don't have a grant office.
Right.
Bigger institutions will, and those offices are trained to help you write these grants and help you to write the budgets to where that makes sense to the people that are going to review them. But that's a big factor, that it's just trial and error. This is basically how I've run into it. And making sure you can always dream big, but most of the time things are always going to be more expensive than they typically are when it comes to that too. So that's another factor of it.
And it sounds like you guys did a very good job of trying to anticipate some of those costs, with everything to knowing about the gas gift cards and all of those things that were factored in advance, because I think that's the hardest part of budgeting anything is you can't foresee every expense that comes up. So the more that you do foresee, the better. Was that budget, was that something part that you had to submit as part of this proposal? You had to be able to say, we have these expenses, they're gonna be this much, here's what we need this money for, all those things?
That is exactly what we had to do. So you have to just start doing some digging and background research on what things might cost, trying to be budget friendly, contacting companies, for example, the resistance bands, and telling them you're doing part of research. You're doing this for part of research, you're thinking about buying these, can you provide a discount?
Yeah, okay,
If you get really lucky, some places will, if you're doing research with their equipment, they will give them to you, basically for free. Not in this case, but that's
But it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yes. Oh no, it never hurts to ask. And then other aspects in terms of writing the budget itself, it's looking at possible unforeseen costs and being able to allot money for maybe help that you might need. And those are some of the other just aspects that the more experience and the more writing you have, the better you're going to get at it with it when it comes to that. But then also having people help that may know more about budgeting related to grants and what you would expect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the smaller scale kind of experience, version of this that I've experienced and people in my department experience is we do, because in archaeology we do so much studying abroad in the summers, to attend field programs, to learn to do archaeology in the field. And those are all like tuition paying experiences generally where you're paying to be there. And a big part of that is like applying for scholarships, which are obviously like much smaller than this, but it's kind of the same idea where you have to say like, okay, well, here's the program that I want to go to, and here are the skills that I'm going to bring to the program, and here's how much money I have from working a summer job or whatever it is, and then here's how much money I still need. And like, those are the kind of things where, again, you kind of do set yourself up to say, like, yeah, I might fail, and these are competitive, like, a lot of them are national scholarships where they're only giving out like 2 or 3, you know. But again, it never hurts to put yourself out there, and you never know how much funding you might get. And so being able to do that process and like getting professors to help you, I think is one way that like for myself and for some of my classmates, like that's been the closest experience, I guess, that we've had, like similarly to like what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. It's all relative and it's all context dependent, but depending on where you're at in your career. I personally know people that have written, you know, multi-million-dollar grants, years of experience doing that, and they'll still not get funded.
Right.
And you just keep trying and trying again, and you know, in hopes that you do at some point. That's just part of the process of it regarding this.
Yeah.
The grant process. I mean.
Absolutely. Other than that kind of like unpredictability of like whether you will actually get funded and like all the logistics, would you say there's any other like particularly like challenging aspects of like the grant writing process, or is that kind of the main point? I
would say trying to write something, especially if you're a content expert in the area. For example, I'm not a content expert in like pre-diabetes per se.
Okay.
I understand pre-diabetes from the exercise like standpoint. But if you are a heavy content expert, depending on where you're going to send these grants into, is trying to write in a way that everybody can understand.
Okay, yeah.
Honestly, it's very difficult sometimes. It takes practice. You know, some people are naturally better writers. And for me, myself, it's taken lots of practice. And that's the same thing for publications when I published in journals in the past. You can use all the scientific jargon, but ultimately, if you want to try to make your research more amenable to everybody, to be able so they can understand it, you write it in a more efficient manner so that the layperson who doesn't know everything about that area is going to understand better. So I'd probably say that's another big challenge that I kind of ran into with this.
Just like knowing your audience. Yeah, absolutely.
And what's helpful with that is using the writing center on campus, having the feedback sent through the whole team multiple times, having different eyes on it. For example, the 2 people who are pre-diabetic professionals, like they understand that realm, the 2 doctors, they may not understand as much about exercise. So you get both vantage points from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems like some key takeaways, like maybe like for advice for like students or researchers or people who are trying to like thinking about going through this process, it's like that like openness to making mistakes, like getting that feedback, just being persistent, like those kind of seem like those are kind of general, but the big like takeaways I guess from this.
Yeah, and it can be very discouraging, just to be honest, but that's just part of the process. And the more you frame your mind around it from the start like that, I'm not saying being pessimistic, but the more you frame on the possibility that this effort you put in could ultimately, at that moment in time, may not result in a funding, it doesn't mean it's the end. You know, you try again.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Anything else that you want to add about the grants?
I guess one of the posed questions was like what advice, some other advice you could ask people. It's this grant I found out about, you know, just through talking with people. One of our other faculty members that's public health in our department has worked and been a reviewer for the CTSI that this was granted from. And so looking through those avenues, talking with individuals about the grant writing process, doing some background research, asking individuals that know or have been part of writing grants, picking their brain, and then ultimately it's jumping in. Jumping into it. And you know, the last part of that also that I just thought of was making sure you follow all the aspects of what's required in the grant.
Yep,
So,
like following the directions.
And it sounds silly to say that, but I have, read stuff through the people I follow in social media about not getting funded or getting rejected on a grant because this part was missing. Or, that's a mistake you make once typically, and
right.
For the future. So.
But that might have been like a time you really needed it or something. So
yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And like knowing that that like attention to detail, I guess, like never goes away. That's one thing people talk about, like, like if you hate writing papers, like writing doesn't go away, research doesn't really go away, like in so many of these fields, that like having those abilities to communicate clearly and follow the directions and stuff like that are applicable for sure.
Yeah, start early and bite-sized chunks. So if there's a grant that's not due until July of next year, starting now would be a good time, or earlier, just depending on the size that you're trying to apply for.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. I think that's a great list of like little bullet points for sure. Very good. So then I guess like moving on to looking into like sort of like the outcomes and impacts like of this study going forward, like as you get started like doing your like the trial runs, like the pre-runs like that you're doing next like in the spring, like what are like the outcomes that you're kind of hoping for the project, like for the researchers, maybe even for the students that are involved, for the patients obviously, like what are the goals?
So some of them are health improvements overall. Hopefully improving their blood sugar would be a big factor because exercise can quote unquote reverse type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
So if somebody is pre-diabetic, they're on the verge, and they start exercising and their muscles get more efficient at using the sugar, that could be beneficial. Now there are other aspects that are going to, kind of compete with that. It depends on diet, but we can't control everything in a research study. So that one's a big one, health improvements, and even if that doesn't improve, the self-efficacy aspect of it. Yeah. Because so many people, even I myself, who have exercised for close to 20 years, there are times where you don't have the motivation, the drive, you just get tired, whether it's work, life, it doesn't matter. So hopefully giving them the education and tools, showing them that they're capable of doing this, that can improve their self-efficacy so that they might want to continue on just on their own afterwards from what they've learned.
Absolutely.
That's another huge factor, definitely.
Yeah, and I think especially since you said like this is like going to be like a 3-month period, right? Like that's a good amount of time for them to like try to form like a habit, like of actually making this like a regular part of their life, which is awesome.
Yes, and I would say the last part is, health equity. I am not as well versed in that area until I started, doing some research and talking with these clinicians. Just in Vanderburgh County alone, there is big time health inequality, like a lot of places, and we, you want to try to avoid that. It's there's a lot of factors involved, but at least maybe this could be something that could help improve that. It's kind of similar to people, adding in park spaces in the community to get people to be more active, or bike trails or walking trails. That's kind of what we hope to bring into with this particular type of study, at least the start of it.
Absolutely. What would you say, like for like the students who are involved, who are like helping to oversee those exercise sessions? Like, what's kind of like the goal, like for them to get out of this experience? Would you say?
So based on the most of the students that will be involved are going to be exercise and sports science students at UE, and then kinesiology and exercise students at USI. And most of them are, at least at UE, are pre-professional and are going down the physical therapy track, or even possibly the physician assistant track. So as part of their entire undergrad, whether if you're at UE, you learn about exercise, how to build an exercise plan, how to implement exercise. And if a large portion of these students are going to PT, that is what PT is. It is providing people with an exercise plan to rehabilitate their injury. And the more you're able to just talk with people and provide clear direction so that they can understand, whether that with this part of the project, the training aspect, being able just to be personable, be motivating, provide them with the education as well in terms of the why you would want to exercise. That's what a lot of the current generation wants to know, but still providing that education and teaching them the importance of exercise as well. That's kind of my hope for all of it. They'll get some of the training, but being involved, and then outside of that, just involved in research in general.
Absolutely.
Research is not for everybody, and a lot of people know that, but it doesn't have to be something you think about going into a lab and spending just hours a day doing the same thing over and over and over again. That's necessary for sure in certain aspects of research, but and with community-based stuff, as I'm learning, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. And who knows, it might sway students to want to work at particular physical therapy clinics that are for underserved populations that we have in Evansville. I don't remember the names off the top of my head right now. That's kind of on the tip of my tongue, but there are PT clinics that some of them work with pro bono. UE's own ACE Care, that's a pro bono clinic as well. So, maybe that's where students want to start trying to work with, is those populations who desperately need therapy for an injury, but it is not cheap.
Right.
So that's something else that maybe they'll take away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. Are these students, you said like most of them are on these pre-professional tracks, are these generally going to be like upperclassmen then who are going to be in this part of it, or?
Maybe. I'm going for everybody their first semester as a freshman right now.
Okay.
In their second semester needs to be a freshman in the spring. I'm hoping to get some of those involved.
Okay, yeah.
Because just the nature of the training and involvement in any aspect, they can be as involved as they want, or if they are unable to be that involved but still be part of it, that's good too. But yes, it would likely be more upperclassmen just because they'll have more knowledge base in terms of the coursework.
Right.
But that's not a requirement.
Right, that makes sense. And I think it's something that hopefully if this becomes like an ongoing project, it can be hopefully something that maybe like students can like grow up through that system and like start out with a little bit less and then take on more responsibility or on more interest as they like are able to keep going with it too, perhaps.
And if you're involved now, the physical therapy department with UE, almost all the faculty have their own line of research with their areas of expertise, and students, when they get into that DPT program, will be doing research and reading papers about research and possibly making like posters for conferences and stuff.
Right.
So if you're involved now, it's just going to prepare you that much more when you get into those programs.
Okay,
Even
absolutely.
PA, you're going to read a lot of research in the physician assistant program. I mean, any of those secondary education or further education programs.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like a great way to to be preparing the students, for those kinds of things.
Definitely.
Definitely. So then looking forward, kind of again still with the project, some of the things we had like down were like maybe like to talk about either like some of the challenges that you encountered so far setting up or things that you're anticipating, and then also just like the other future directions that you're like thinking about taking the project in as it keeps expanding. So.
I alluded to a lot of the challenges setting up. I personally, as a faculty member at UE, this is where it's uncharted territory for me because I'm new. I have a pretty heavy teaching load, and it's going to be being very good with my time management, as I stress to all my students with studying and stuff, in incorporating this while in the middle of a semester and teaching.
Right. Yeah.
And then possibly expanding that into the summer next year will be much easier because I won't have a full load of teaching. But that is 1,000% going to be a challenge I know I'll encounter, and I can plan for all the setbacks, but the goal is just to be understanding of that up front and just know that I'm doing my best as the process goes. And it's going to be the same for everybody because we all still have our careers and jobs. And that's with anybody doing research, unless you're at a very specific institution where that is your sole purpose.
Right.
Is research.
It's usually extra.
There are positions like that. But that's part of, and that's big challenge I know I'll encounter. And logistical, it's kind of the same things we discussed earlier. Mm-hmm. It's making sure we get enough people involved.
Yep.
And the other biggest one is once we start recruiting individuals, it's keeping them part of the program, because attrition will be real. It happens in these projects. And navigating like what's going to be a comfortable kind of number of individuals we can consistently keep until we meet our end for the project.
Right.
And that's just another logistical thing that we can plan for, but we just have to kind of wait and see once they get started.
Yeah.
There might be heavier loaded weeks versus lighter weeks. It's just going to vary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So then so I know you talked about that the initial thing is going to be like roughly 3 months, right? So then, and that's going to go in the spring. So then what is kind of like the goal? Is it going to be like a bunch of like multiple 3-month cycles, or are you looking at just like expanding from there? How is that going to work?
That's a perfect question, because I had the same question since I'm not well versed in this type of research, and what it typically is going to be is an ongoing until we collect all the people. So if it is March and we have recruited 20 people, what we will probably do is stagger them.
Okay.
So that we aren't doing having 3 times a week for 20 individuals, which it will only be in a group phase, but that's a lot of work per week to schedule and keep in touch with 20 people. Mm-hmm. So the idea is just kind of an ongoing process. Once we get 7 or 8, start them. And once we get 7 or 8, start them, and you just keep track in a log. And their ends will be staggered when they finish the 3 months and when they do the final assessments. That's going to be, if we had all the manpower or person power, then yes, we would pile everybody in at one time. But that's just not the nature of how this is going to work. So it's an ongoing process. We will end up recruiting probably way more than 50. Okay. But that's because there will be some that drop out for various reasons. And that's the idea for that process.
That makes sense. Yeah, so then how is the funding, so like with the grant, is the grant going to continue funding that, or is it going to be one of these things where you're going to have to reapply for new grants? Like what is kind of like the scope or the length of that funding going to look like?
So the future kind of direction of this is once we have this, which we haven't actually mentioned, the grant is $25,000. So it's smaller scale, but it is still a grant. So we're excited about getting funded for that.
It's funny you say that, because like 25,000 might be small in the scheme of some grants, but for a lot of people, like a lot of students hearing that sounds like a lot of money.
Yes.
So and, that's a good perspective to have.
Very true. Yes. Most of this is it's through a 2-year plan, so the funding is maximum of 2 years. Now that means we can get all the funding basically given to us right up front, and then we just stagger in budget and spend what we have in an effort to finish. I don't anticipate it taking like 2 years to complete the whole thing. We have a generic timeline, it's to finish all of our individuals by let's say the end of the summer, maybe in August, September, October of 25. Then from there we start collecting, analyzing the data, writing stuff up. During that time, we hope to be able to provide some of this data and provide it back to the people who participated and individuals in the public. So if that means doing some type of like workshops or seminars in the public through part of the clinics, like say, hey, Wednesday night from 4 to 5, we are going to be presenting some data from a project that we did about how important it is to exercise if you're pre-diabetic. Mm-hmm. And our hope is to involve students with that too, so they do some types of presentations in that manner. Getting information out to local conferences, using UE's undergraduate research program, and faculty like a symposium where they have their research discussed. Getting that information out there and disseminating it. Additional funding sources. Currently, we're hoping to possibly go through Deaconess Research Institute as well. Okay. To essentially double that amount. That's something Dr. Pearl Kordikumapale is writing up in the hopes that we can get the double. That will just help a lot. And then the future, one of the focuses of the grant is sustainability. Okay. So what is our plan for the future. Some of that outside of all of this is, dissemination of it. It's to take this data, analyze it, hopefully provide some evidence of its effectiveness,
Mm-hmm.
and implement that into another grant, basically stating, here is evidence that this works, here's what we want to do to answer our next question. And if that means providing them a longer term training plan, involving maybe a slightly different population, expanding outside of Evansville into the surrounding counties, to try to focus on all those underserved populations in those areas as well. That's kind of another focus of this. And that's what's nice about the grant, though, is they have a conversation with you about that and require you to kind of write up as part of the proposal what you envision this to look like in the future. And so that's what we envision right now.
That is awesome. I especially love the idea of like the community, like kind of like a talk back, like saying like, here's what we found, like the presentations, because if the whole point of this grant was to try to form these community networks, and you're doing all this research that can benefit these underprivileged communities, like these aren't the kinds of people generally who are like reading these scholarly periodicals and stuff like that. So to be able to like get information out in places that like normal people can actually access it and like learn from it, even people who are not in the program, I think is super important to be able to get that out there.
Yeah, that's going to be one of our big focuses, our foci for this, is to make sure that it does get to the public, to further emphasize the importance of exercise for health, whether it is prediabetes or just joint health,
right?
Independence as you age, a whole host of other health items.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what a great experience for those students too, to be able to talk about it and like do like the presentations and like that kind of like public interaction, which is like obviously a completely different skill set than actually doing like the health lessons and stuff like that, but also very applicable.
Oh so, yes, especially if you're in your career, if you're going to be a PT or PA, exercise science professional in general, if you have your bachelor's and you don't go those two professional routes, you're going to be working with people. So being able to convey the information and knowledge you have in a way that a lot of people can understand. It's a task. It takes training. Yeah.
I mean, like you said, like research isn't everyone's thing. Neither is public speaking, but they're both they're both good skills.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anything else on that? Do you think? Otherwise, I did want to ask you, like, kind of before we wrap up, like, if you had any advice to offer students, like, either like for your department related or not, just like who are interested in these kinds of things, like doing research, doing grants, like what I know we talked about the advice for the grants, but like what if you have anything like in general for people who want to do research?
For students, it's just getting your foot in the door, even if it's something that is, don't pigeonhole yourself is the way I would kind of think about it, especially early on. You have plenty of time through your undergrad and through if you're going to DPT route, or if you're someone like me who goes master's to PhD, you have plenty of time to kind of pigeonhole yourself into a niche. But the more open you are kind of starting out, that's just part of the process of learning what really drives your interest. Yeah. And that's ultimately how I learned how to just become a teacher. Why I wanted to be in education is trying a whole bunch of different things and realizing, this isn't really what I want to do. So that's another big factor. So getting involved early, even if it's your freshman, getting involved in the clubs that are related to, in health sciences, but it can be any club on campus, honestly. And then, asking questions about research in general. I myself try to involve it in my courses. So encouraging the critical thinking and thinking outside the box and just posing questions to them to kind of see what they're thinking. And, you get in, I do keep the same phrase of you get in what you put in. You get out what you put in. Yeah. Honestly. Absolutely. That's the motto I've kept for a long time, and that's what's helped me be successful in making it to an assistant professor with my degrees in education and getting grants, even though I've had my failures along the way. But the more you put in, it just pays dividends in the end, honestly.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I especially loved like what you said about don't pigeonhole yourself, because you don't know always like all the things that you're interested in until you like learn more things, and there's so many things out there that it's really easy to like if you limit yourself right away, like there's lots of stuff that you're maybe would never experience if you don't like take those classes or whatever it is. And that's why one thing I love about being here at UE, which is like a liberal arts school, is like being able to take classes that are in things that are, and actually being forced to take classes that are in things that are not related to your major, and like, or even a variety of things within your major, to know that there's other stuff out there, and it's never too late to like add something else that is an interest. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's all about, you know, creating like the whole, the holistic view, or the whole person kind of mantra. It's, you do want to get your degree, but you aren't just your degree. There are a lot of other things that you involve yourself in. And that's that experience, even if you never do research ever again, the experience you have in your undergrad, it's just going to benefit you for anything you do, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
From there on out.
Absolutely. And kind of like we've said, like those like critical thinking skills and writing skills and interpersonal skills, like those are all going to benefit you regardless of your field, regardless of if you teach or do lab work or like whatever it is, like those are all going to help.
Yep,
so
definitely.
Yeah, those are very applicable things. Okay. Anything else that you'd like to add? Anything you wish? Because again, like you're the expert. I am an archaeology student. Like anything else that you wanted to add, that you wanted to talk about that I did not, that I forgot to ask you, that I didn't ask you?
No, other than the fact that this is pretty awesome, and I'm excited to be able to kind of bring this to the public. And I'm going to take this article when it's done and probably put it in a little frame in my office, because it's just one of those new things. I was like kind of nervous to think about doing something like this, but when you reached out, this again just goes along the lines of what I've been saying this whole time, not just the research, but this is how you spread the knowledge. That's my whole idea behind education, is spreading my knowledge to all my students and people around me. Absolutely. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, no, we're super excited, and it's also very exciting. Like one of the things that's come up about this that we didn't necessarily anticipate is that most of the professors who are participating are relatively new professors. Like we have a couple of professors who are lined up, like one who's brand new this year and one who came last year. And then you said this is like your third year, and so there's going to be this great opportunity, I think, to highlight especially these like newer professionals who are doing this amazing research. And so again, like you're just the first one of hopefully many more of these. Yeah. And so we're very excited.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.